Welcome to the Social Chameleon Show, where it's our goal to help you learn, grow, and transform on your path to becoming legendary. Today, we have an extraordinary guest, Mary Beth O'Connor, whose life journey powerfully demonstrates the transformative strength of resilience and personal determination. Mary Beth has been sober since 1994, recovering from severe methamphetamine addiction, trauma, abuse, and anxiety. And her recovery story is captured in her award-winning memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Triumph and Addiction. What caught my attention about Mary Beth isn't just her remarkable transformation, but her willingness to challenge the recovery establishment and advocate for multiple pathways to sobriety, making the case that recovery doesn't have to look like what everyone says it should. After rebuilding her life, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law and ascended to the position of a federal administrative law judge. She now dedicates her time to advocating for multiple and secular recovery pathways as a director of She Recovers Foundation and LifeRing Secular Recovery. Through powerful essays in renowned publications such as the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times, she consistently challenges and reshapes the conversation around addiction and recovery. This conversation isn't about inspiration porn or feel-good recovery stories. It's about the uncomfortable truths of building a life after rock bottom, the systematic issues in how we approach addiction, and what it takes to sustain long-term change from the conventional wisdom when the conventional wisdom doesn't work for you. Mary Beth's journey is more than inspiration. It's a testament to the fact that with the right mindset and strategy, anyone can transform their life, overcome immense adversity, and indeed become legendary. Now let's dive into an impactful conversation with Mary Beth O'Connor. Mary Beth, welcome to the Social Chameleon Show.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. Very intriguing podcast pitch. I was like, okay, I got to have this lady on. So you have a book, and I guess about your life in a way, a memoir or such.
Yes.
From Junkie to Judge. What is one story you'd like to highlight from that book? And folks, you guys can get the book and you guys can read all about everything else. But what's one story you'd want to highlight here?
I guess the one that I think about when you ask that at first is the positive experience of first drug use. I think there's sort of we don't talk enough about what the reason is that the drugs are attractive, right? And so it's why in my memoir I include my pre-drug use childhood to sort of put in context what happened. But my first drug was alcohol when I was 12. And it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine, which some people know.
I remember those.
Yes. And my girlfriend brought it over on like her bicycle, and we drank out of Flintstones glasses that used to have grape jelly in them. I mean, this was our age, right?
Oh yeah.
But I had such so much stress and anxiety from the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the verbal, emotional abuse in my household, that for me, that first drink, that really caught my attention because it made me feel so much better. Mm-hmm. I mean, I felt like sort of like my muscles relaxed, like, oh, I'm taking a deeper breath, but also like I'm giggling with my girlfriend in like a more openly joyful way because the pain felt further distant from me. And that caught my attention. And that was why I pursued it. If it wasn't working in the beginning, I probably wouldn't have kept going. And I escalated quickly, but that first experience was a real turning point for me because it was such a positive experience.
It's interesting. I've heard that from I've heard it from alcoholics. I can't recall hearing it from drug users. I'm trying to remember back to myself. I drank quite heavily in my youth, not in my youth, but in my, 20. I didn't drink until I was probably 19 or something like that. But I did drink a lot. But I don't remember necessarily. I remember feeling that like social lubricant and you kind of feel a little bit more free. But that feeling you're saying, I can't remember feeling that. But I have heard that a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is let's, make sure we all agree alcohol is a drug. Right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So anytime that I say drugs during our discussion, I always mean including alcohol. And so it's still the number one killer, despite the opioid overdose epidemic. And it's still the most abused drug in America. But for me, it was the beginning, right? Because I added in weed and pills and acid. And I I found methamphetamine, which was my drug of choice, at 16, and I was shooting meth at 17 and in full bore addiction in high school. So that's where I went from 12 to 17, from that first drink to shooting meth on a regular basis. But you're right. The reality is that most people, even though they might enjoy the experience and have fun with it, most people use in moderation, or at least mostly in moderation, even if they have the occasional episode where they overconsume. It's the group of us, the minority of us, who pursue it at an excessive level despite the negative consequences, which is the definition of addiction, right? Continued use despite notable negative consequences. It's usually because it's either you either have a trauma history and or you have untreated mental health disorders. And so the drug is providing pain management. It's providing symptom relief. It's giving us more than just, I'm having a good time out with my friends.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, I believe, and I guess the guy was talking about it. I never clicked in my head. It's like the alcohol or the drug. It's the medicine. It's not the problem. It's the solution. And I was like, oh my God, it's the solution. I was like, wow, that's a complete reframe. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure I have something wrong with me. I never quite experienced like the total negative effects of alcohol and drugs, but I did get drunk every single night. I think I would try and take Sundays off to kind of recover a little bit. Many times I went to work at 8:00 and I had stopped drinking at 6 and tried to take a quick nap. I'm sure people would have said I had a problem. Of course, I never thought I had a problem, even though I did think I drank too much at times. And I know I never really got into hard drugs. Weed, I don't like the way I feel, but I did have a little stint where I did a lot of cocaine, and it was fun. And I don't really feel like I had a problem until one day I was paying bills and stuff on a Friday after payday. And I was like, all right, everything's paid and I got this much money for cocaine and go to the club. And I was like, whoa, am I budgeting? Do I have a cocaine budget now? And I was like, okay, this has got to stop. And I was able to just kind of just distance myself from everybody and stop. So, but I'm not good at moderation. That's why I don't drink anymore, because I don't have, if I drink, I'm like, I'm just going to drink until I'm drunk. So I've had my ways. I've had to completely stop. And it's not just alcohol or whatever. That's the thing I do with lots of things. I can't have, ice cream in the house because I'll eat it all. So that's how I kind of wire. I'm not sure other things you can speak on these kind of things I'm thinking of.
Well, actually, what that makes me think of is how today we know that substance use disorders, which, is the modern name for addiction, the medical name, it actually is on a spectrum, mild, moderate, and severe, right? Just like it's a mental health condition, just like you have mild, moderate, or severe anxiety or mild, moderate, severe depression. You probably had more of a mild toward the moderate level of an issue because you were having maybe a little bit of consequence, like spending money not in the best places or not being as productive as you wanted because you were hungover, but you weren't having extreme consequences. And so you would be at the lower level. And for people who are more in that range, they are more likely to on their own be able to stop. And so, that group, when we talk about sort of like treatment decisions, what treatment you need can really fall on, a big factor is where you fall in that spectrum. And for someone at your level of the spectrum, it is an issue. There are some negative consequences, but you're not so far into the severe range that you absolutely need treatment to stop. A lot of people in your situation are able to stop on their own. And it's good that they do, because it's a recognition that this actually is going down a bad path. And I already don't like what's happening. And my guess is I'm going to like it less when things, when the consequences start adding up. Right.
I don't know if I want to advocate for self-diagnosis, but however, like you're saying, how can you maybe try to identify yourself and maybe where you are on the spectrum? And I can also probably see you're going to obviously probably say, oh, well, I'm not severe on this. You're probably going to bump it down a notch. But are there telltale signs or something like that where you can try and be honest with yourself and say, you know what, I'm in one of these levels and I need to fix my shit?
Yeah, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is the book where all mental health disorders are, and they're described, and their symptoms are there, and they're categorized. And so for substance use disorder, there's a test, there's a list of questions, and I think if you have 2, you're on the mild level, and then the more of those questions that you answer yes to, the more you go up in the severity range. So you can get that test online for free if you just Google it. That's one way. Another way is to really to honestly think about how is the drug impacting my life. And I'll say that's even if you don't have a substance use disorder, or let's say an alcohol addiction, it doesn't mean it's not having impacts in your life that you might think, actually, I'm not liking the way this is sort of controlling my life or impacting my life. Maybe I should stop, even though I don't qualify as having a drug, right? But so, for example, it doesn't have to be, I lost my job, I lost my home, I lost my marriage. It can be, I'm getting into arguments with my friends that because I'm under the influence, I'm perhaps getting in conflict with my partner. I'm waking up feeling, as you said, I'm hungover. I'm not productive. I'm losing my Sundays because I was out partying on Saturday, and maybe that's actually not what I want. I'm spending more money than I think that I should, and it's interfering with other financial goals. So the consequences don't have to be gigantic, but it is useful, even if you don't have an addiction, to every once in a while sit down and see if you're using the substances in the way that you actually want to use them. If you look at it and make an sort of an honest evaluation.
Now, I've heard people say, I go to work. I'm fine. It's not that big of a deal. I remember talking with some guys from Vietnam. They're like, yeah, we used to do heroin and we'd go to work. And how do you maybe reconcile that? Or how do you be honest and truthful with yourself and say, listen, buddy, you think you're functional, but you've got something going on. You need to either go to treatment or stop or whatever it is.
Well, I will say there are people who use heroin recreationally, right? So some people do use heroin, once a month, and they go to work on Monday. So, a couple of things can clue you in is if you're getting input from others that you might have a problem, that's usually a red flag that it's time to do an assessment. But also, if you're just sort of feeling like your life isn't in a happy place, one of the things that you can do when you're looking at why that might be or changes that you might want to make, substances is one place to look. It doesn't mean it might be the only cause, but it could be part of it. Maybe you're sort of unhappy with your job, or you're unhappy in your marriage, and you're using the substances to sort of mask those feelings or make it easier to tolerate, when really, if you took the substances away, you'd be sort of more likely to look at the situation directly and say, actually, you know what, I need to do the work to resolve this situation in order to be long-term happy. In other words, the substances can give you short-term relief. They can give you short-term relief, but they're not going to resolve any underlying issue. And so is the substance sort of allowing me to stay sort of out of inertia or out of fear or whatever it might be, is to stay with a behavior that's actually not even in my own best interest. And the substance isn't the problem, but it's helping me live a life that's not actually the happiest and best life that I want to live.
Right. Mary Beth, the reason I drink is because of my job. It's because of my spouse. It's because of my kids. That seems to be a thing. And like you're saying, that's the hard part is what the way I'm thinking about this is my life sucks. That's why I drink. And I drink because my life sucks. And then the easy thing would be to just continue that on. The hard thing is saying, why does my life suck? How can I change it? How do I fix my shit? That's the hard part.
Yes. And is the substance sort of interfering with my ability to do that? And I will say that's why some people do things like dry January. So dry January or sober October is another one where people take off 30 days from all substances, or at least alcohol. And the reason is because that break can give you clarity. It can help you notice, when am I feeling the compulsion to drink? What's happening? That's creating that urge? What's going on? That's information, about what you may be using the drug to sort of compensate for. But also it can help you see, what is my life like when I'm sober for 30 days? Do I actually wake up feeling more refreshed? Do I look better because I'm not hungover? Am I getting along with my partner better? Am I enjoying my work better? I mean, it can be that even a 30-day break can be a real sort of information gathering time that can help you decide, how much do I want to consume going forward? Under what circumstances? For what kinds of events? Those are all things that can that can be easier to do a sort of an intelligent assessment of if you take a bit of a break.
And I can imagine there could be some dangers there as well. Trying to take a break from certain substances and stuff like that.
That's a good point. I mean, if you're on the more severe end of the spectrum, especially for alcohol or sedatives, you actually, it can be risky to go through a sudden withdrawal. So if you're at that mild level, you should be fine. Although you may want to talk to your doctor if you start feeling like maybe it's a little more than that. But you can die from withdrawal from alcohol and benzodiazepines, which are sedatives. Opioid withdrawal can be really painful. And so for those three things, sometimes you need what's called medically supervised withdrawal, where you work with a medical provider and they'll give you medications for cravings to reduce your sort of seizure risk, those kind of things, keep you hydrated. So you're right. If you're at the more severe end of the spectrum, you should really need to talk to a professional, a medical professional, before abruptly stopping.
Now, a scenario I thought of here is, Mary Beth, listen, yeah, I'm doing dry January, but it's been 2 weeks. I know I can stop anytime I want. I'm going out to the party this weekend. What do you say, something like that?
The fact that you can't do 30 days is a red flag.
Right.
A red flag. And that should capture your attention because it's meaningful. It's meaningful that you really feel the need to go out and use in that period of time. So that's all the more reason to do the assessment. But the other thing I'll say is there's a lot of people who are now just choosing what's called sort of mindful drinking. And when I say drinking or other substance use, like they're just saying, like, especially the 30s and unders, they may be saying, you know what, I'm just, for health reasons, for wellness reasons, physical wellness, emotional wellness, I'm only going to consume substances, let's say once a week, or only at special events, or, only when I do X, Y, or Z. And that can be a really healthy way to look at it. It's not that it has to be all or nothing. Mm-hmm. There is ways to tackle it in between that can be, have positive or neutral impact on your life, but it's about that mindfulness. It's about thinking it through.
It's an interesting way you're saying that. My first thought is you're full of shit. Like, you're just using that as an excuse to continue consuming things you should be consuming. But then my second thought is, well, I can see there is a social component. Maybe you just literally have one drink or one whatever. Maybe you have an edible or something like that. And it's just something that gives you the ability to stay out with your friends maybe when you wouldn't have. How do we balance the two of those, maybe dichotomy there, or the different things that's happening?
Well, I'll say it can also be a short-term stress reliever. If you were using a drink or a cannabis gummy, once a month to relieve your stress for the evening, that's probably not an issue, right? As long as that's not going to interfere with your ability to resolve the problem long term. You just had a really bad day and you want to relax for the night, or have a good dinner with your partner and have a glass of wine. In small frequency, that's not going to harm you. There can be some benefits from that. So I don't have anything against substance use in general. I just want people to understand the risks, and I want us to be able to help them when the problem arises. And so for me, it's always about accurate risk information, not exaggerated risk information, but also not minimized risk information. But also, I really would like to see us have a robust treatment plan, as affordable, readily accessible for substances, but also for mental health in general. And right now, we just don't really have that. And so there's a lot of things we could do better to give people the help they need. But having these kind of discussions can be part of that, so people know where they are and know that they need to take the next step.
Yeah, something, I don't know if it applies to this topic per se, but I know it's like food and things like that, and maybe workouts and stuff. What seems to help is actually tracking what you're actually doing and being very honest and saying, at 10 o'clock last night, I did have a bag of chips and whatnot. Do you think something like that would work for saying somebody, oh, I only drink like once a week, or but in reality, you're probably doing it a lot more. It's like, well, it's Cinco de Mayo, and then it's Girls' Day, and then it's this, and then the next thing you know, like, there's 12 holidays in a month and you're drinking or doing whatever on all of them. Do you think maybe having some kind of log saying, hey, you know what? Okay, I've had 3 drinks last night. Actually, wow, I didn't think about it, but I had a drink on Tuesday. Oh, wow, I forgot. I went out with my friends on Friday. I had some edibles. I didn't think I had all that much. Is that something maybe that works in this situation?
I think information is always helpful. I would say there are, for example, with alcohol, there are trackers that you can, like apps that you can do about how much money you saved if you don't drink, or how much you're spending if you do. And sometimes that spending alcohol app can really be an eye opener for people.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I want to emphasize that people don't always measure their alcohol correctly. Okay, there are specific ounces for what counts for a drink, right? First of all, moderate use for men is 2 drinks a day at most, and for women, it's 1 drink a day. But it's not like the big wine glass filled all the way to the top. I think it's 5 ounces per wine. I'd have to double check that. But so part of it is going to be an honesty thing. Make sure you understand what a drink actually is. If you have beer that has a higher alcohol content than the typical beer, it's not going to, count this. You have to adjust the ounces based on the amount of alcohol. But you're right. Information can be really helpful. It can be a first step to see where things really are. Or if people are saying you're drinking too much and you don't think you are, starting to track it can really make it clear who's right. You can either prove them right or prove them wrong, right? But honesty is always an important feature in all of this. And it's when people are ready to do that for them. And often ready can mean there are some negative consequences, like that can capture our attention. And the other thing I will say is that sometimes I get asked about switching addictions. Like when people get sober, do they just start gambling or start, overeat or whatever? And the solution to that is to address what's underneath the alcohol use or the other behavioral disorders, whatever, gaming or gambling or whatever it might be. Because if you don't address what was the sort of the creating the impulse, creating the need, what need the drug was serving, you're much more likely to transfer to some other negative behavior that's going to have consequences than if you do. And that's why a lot of us, like me, the subtitle to my book is One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, right? Because not only did I have trauma in the house, I had sexual assaults, multiple outside the home, a violent boyfriend. When I got sober, I knew that trauma was underneath my drug use, but I also knew that if I didn't get it under control, I was never going to be happy. I was never going to be productive, even if I could by some miracle stay sober. And so for many of us, we need both treatments. We need substance treatment, and at the same time, from the beginning, we need treatment for our PTSD or our depression or anxiety or bipolar or whatever else it might be. And so the treatment needs, sometimes people, like families will say to me, my family member tried rehab 8 times. She's tried everything. And I said, well, was she ever evaluated for any other mental health condition?
Right.
Because a lot of times the reason it's failing is because people aren't getting everything that they need from a treatment standpoint.
Yeah. And for folks listening and whatnot, I will link to all these resources we talk about so you guys can easily jump in the show notes and get these charts, different tests and whatever things we do talk about so you guys can easily get those resources. It's funny you say that. My wife is a psychiatric nurse, and that's the same thing I see with her. And she talks about all the time. I was like, you guys aren't teaching them anything. You're giving them meds and you're sending them on. You're not teaching them any skills. You're not solving their problems. You're not giving them solutions. There's nothing happening, but here's your meds. Go on.
Well, medication can be a really important tool, especially for opioid use disorder and alcohol use disorder. It can medication, let's say for opioids, which typically is buprenorphine or methadone, right? The medication will, for example, reduce the fatal overdose risk by more than half. So right there, it's a vast benefit. But it also will make it more likely the person will stay focused on recovery. Some people use those meds for a sort of a limited period of time, maybe the first 6 months or the first year. Some people actually need them longer term than that, but you don't know in the beginning. But medication, alcohol use disorder, there's medications for those, increases the odds of success. There's no meds yet for stimulants, but there are meds that are in trial and there are meds that are being used off label, but there's nothing as targeted and no FDA approved med the way they are for opiates or alcohol. But I would never want to minimize the benefit of the medications for substance use disorders because they're a great benefit. But in the long run, it's the optimal scenario is that you're also giving them mental health treatment and helping them deal with whatever other condition they have, and also giving them housing, and also helping them get a job, and also helping them build, a social support network. So medication alone is better than no medication, right? But it's even better if we can offer them the other supports that they might need in order to really sort of fully recover. And I want to say, methadone is a type of recovery. I support it. Absolutely. So are the others. But, it's also even better if you can have the opportunity to work with treatment professionals and resolve everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say I was minimizing the medication. It's the second half of that equation because time and time again, so well, these patients are back again. This is their 8th time here, and it's like I feel like you don't have that second half of this equation. You guys aren't doing that. It's it's like well, we gave them the treatment plan. It's like right, but there's no follow up or there's no secondary things. That's the thing that kind of frustrates me a bit. And she says a lot of times they're kind of handcuffed in what they're even allowed to do, and I'm like, oh, geez, what's going on here?
Well, the other thing is that a lot of people don't get an appropriate length of treatment, right? And so the system, I mean, it frustrates me when drug policy is discussed as if everybody has access to the full panoply of treatments for the length of time that's necessary, and they get an individualized assessment as to what they might need. And there's an aftercare program, or they get to go into a sober house, or they get skills. These things mostly don't happen, right? It's sort of a crisis management situation for a chronic health condition. You wouldn't expect somebody's diabetes to be resolved because you treated them for 30 days and then sent them out the door, right? And
with a pamphlet.
Yeah, that's right. Here's a pamphlet. Here's what you're supposed to do. And we really do that with addiction. We don't give people the length of treatment that they need, and we don't give them the support afterwards. And we usually don't give them even an individualized assessment. It's usually, here's where you're going to be put. Here's a 28-day program. You're going to do what everybody else does. You're going to do it this way because we told you to. And if you fail, it's on you. It's not on us because we didn't provide you what you actually need. And that is very upsetting. And it's very frustrating to see policy decisions made as if we had, in fact, offered them the help that they really need.
And to me, in my mind, it goes back to kind of sort of what we're talking about here. It's like we're not addressing the problem. We're focused on one thing. And it's so if we just nobody had access to drugs, magically they'd disappear and nobody would do drugs. But really, it's all the other ancillary things that, like I had said earlier, the drug use or whatever. That's the solution to your problem, right? So we're worried about we're trying to get rid of solutions, but we're not really focusing on what the problem is, which is why they're doing these things.
Yes. And the reality, I mean, there are people who sort of develop an issue just from consumption. But the other thing I'll say to that is, on the pain management side, we sometimes conflate dependence with addiction, and they are two different things. And so the problem that has arisen because of the overdose epidemic, the opioid epidemic, the opioid, awash, the pharmaceutical companies making America awash of prescriptions, is that people have legitimate pain management needs, sometimes chronic pain management needs. They got cut off from meds because of the backlash to the excessive prescription. When in fact, the fact that you are physically dependent on a pain med doesn't mean it's an addiction, because addiction is defined as continued use despite negative consequences. If you have a condition such that the pain meds are actually having a positive overall impact on your life, that's not an addiction, right? And even doctors don't always distinguish that properly. And so I always want to make sure that people are given the proper treatment, and that we're not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that's what we do.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there, where I have an injury, a back injury or my ankle or whatever. And it's like, this is enabling me to go to work. This is enabling me to take care of my house and my kids. But I'm not addicted to this. But for the meantime, for this interim, I need this medication.
Yeah, and I may be physically dependent. And don't get me wrong, we should be careful and make sure that the people who get long-term pain meds are the small group who actually needs long-term pain meds. And definitely way more people were given long-term prescriptions than needed them before. But there is a group who they have a physical condition that can't be repaired, at least currently can't be repaired, and the pain won't go away. And we need to recognize that distinction between dependence and addiction, because they aren't the same. For opiates, if you have an addiction, you're almost certainly going to be physically dependent, but you can be physically dependent and not have an addiction.
That's an interesting kind of concept there. It seems a bit like an oxymoron there, but I can see what you're saying with that. Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be the small group, right? It's not most, but there are people like that, and they got cut off. And that's part of why people ended up going out to the street for opioids, because they weren't given prescriptions anymore. And so, we don't always think these things through as far as what the ramifications are going to be of these switches.
Right. And then I could see how you go out to the street, like, listen, I need some oxy. I got whatever, I was in an accident, my back is messed up, I'm waiting on surgery or whatever it is, right? And you go to the streets and like these are cut with other things. And next thing you know,
Yes.
maybe you do become addicted now because of the street versions of these things.
Yeah, and you're addicted to fentanyl or something that, is not, I mean, the problem with street drugs, one of the problems is that you don't know what you're getting. You don't know what it's cut with. You don't know the dosage, like what percentage of my drug is in there. And nowadays, even a pill that looks exactly like an oxy probably is fentanyl and not oxy at all, right? And so you don't know what you're getting. So yeah, it created a whole swirl of new issues because we weren't doing policy based on sort of accurate medical understanding about what had gone wrong, but also to protect the people for whom it was still necessary to have those prescriptions.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of go back a little bit. You were saying about using multiple sources and multiple things. I know you wrote about and whatnot, incorporating different ideas from multiple sources to build a secular recovery plan, not necessarily a 12-step or faith-based. Could you kind of discuss some of that, how you kind of discovered that or came up with that, and how does that all kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, I'll first say that so 12 steps is, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics and all the anonymouses, right? And it has that higher power idea. But there were other ideas that weren't good fits for me. Like, I'm not a turn over your will in your life girl. I didn't agree with the powerless idea. I didn't like to focus on defects. But saying that, 12, I support 12-step recovery. A lot of people work with it, but it's also not like there's a hard line where all the faith-based people go to 12 steps and all the secular people go elsewhere. Because there are atheists and agnostics that make 12 steps work. And there are a lot of faith-based and spiritual people that choose programs other than 12 steps for reasons other than higher power. In other words, they like the self-empowerment idea or the individualized approach. So for me, when I got sober, and it was in 94, because I actually have 31 years of continuous sobriety at this point. Thank you. My rehab swore to me that there was only 12 steps, and that wasn't a good fit for just the reasons I gave you were some of them. But I thought at first, well, they're the experts. That must be true, right? So I did read all the 12-step materials and tried to pull out some ideas, but it was never a good fit. And then I got home from rehab, and I started to think, is that the only option? And I will emphasize for the younger people, there's no Google in 94.
Right, yes.
Google.
You had to go to the library.
I went to the library, right? I went to the library and I did some research and I found alternatives even then. So today I found Women for Sobriety, which still exists today. I actually speak at most of their conferences. I found the parent to what today is Smart Recovery. And I found the parent to what today is LifeRing Secular Recovery. And I'm on the board for LifeRing. And first of all, it was a great relief to know that other people had succeeded doing it different ways. That was like a weight off my shoulder because my rehab told me I was going to fail if I tried to do that. But also it gave me permission to continue doing what I had been doing, which was to view myself as the decision maker in my recovery plan. I really did understand that I needed to listen. Because whether they were 12-step people or otherwise, they had some success. They had knowledge I didn't have. They had strategies I might not think of on my own. They had techniques, but everything they did wasn't going to work for me. So I needed to listen, but I always viewed myself as like a filter. Like, is this going to be a technique or a strategy I think will work for me? And then I should try to use it. Or is it one that I think, no, actually, that's not right for me. I'll let that one go. And so LifeRing, for example, calls out a personalized recovery plan that your plan and my plan will be different because we're different people in different places with different philosophies, different, learning styles, different situations. And so our job in the group is to help each other, maybe to offer strategies and techniques that work for us, but always in the attitude of for your consideration. Right. For your consideration, here's what worked for me. For your consideration, here's an idea I want to share with you. And that's how I tackled it. And that's how I view it today. I think where we run into trouble is when we go from this worked for me to this will work for everybody, or even worse, this is the only thing that works, which is never true. Let me just say it's never true. Yeah. So don't lie. Okay? Yeah. So don't lie. And today the science shows that individual assessments and individual plans will have the best chance of success. So I did it early, but it's much more in the mainstream today than when I got sober.
It reminds me of something else similar I was hearing with that kind of same sentiment where people are they're talking about relationships and stuff. I can see how this kind of fits in here, where people are saying like, well, you can't meet girls because, you know, you got to do this and this, and this is the way it works. It's the only way. And people are like, well, I've gone and done that and it doesn't work for me, so I must have a problem. I can see how that being the same kind of situation where you think there's only one solution and one way. And if you can't do it this way, you're just broken. You're a loser. You're just destined to be whatever.
Yeah, but a person thinking that is one thing. A treatment professional telling you that is like a whole
right
other level, right?
Right.
If you're taking my money and you claim to be an expert, you need to know that there are alternatives. You need to know that there's no one thing that works for everyone.
Right.
And if you don't have that understanding and that education, then you really shouldn't be treating people. So yeah, but even as individuals, it is to me a sort of arrogance to think that, you know, my way is the only way, right? Like, in what area of life is that generally true? That there's one way only, and it happens to be the way that worked for me, of course. Right?
What are you selling me?
Exactly. There is almost no area of life where there's one solution for everyone. Certainly in mental health treatment, there's no mental health disorder where one treatment works for everybody. That doesn't exist. Why would it be different for substance use disorders, for addictions, than it would be for everything else? It's not. And part of that can be that a lot of us do have to do that, tackling, you know, our dually diagnosed or co-occurring disorder, right? Not everybody also has another mental health disorder. A lot of us do. That requires a different plan. But it's also that what works for you can change over time. So your plan, let's say it's 6 months, and your plan 2 years later, it may be different because where you are is different. What techniques that used to help aren't as useful anymore, or you actually are, you know, they were never a good fit, but you sort of did them, but now you want some new ideas. So recovery evolves. And so even for an individual, it's not locked in that this is their plan until the day they die, right? Plans evolve over time because we change and what we're working on changes.
Right. I'd like to throw something out at you here when I think about this space, and I could be completely wrong. This is my thoughts, and I thought you would be a great person to kind of think about this. One thing about these programs that I just don't like is this thought of I'm always an addict. I'm always this. To me, that is such a narrow mindset, and you set yourself up as a victim. Versus, I'd never say, oh, I'm always an accident victim. I always have a broken leg. I'm just not having a broken leg today, or all these different things in our life. I feel like you're setting yourself up for failure by saying, I'm always going to be an addict. I'm always going to be this. Versus, I would think it'd be more empowering. And like I said, I could be completely wrong. Saying, I used to be this. I'm not anymore. I don't do drugs anymore. I don't drink anymore. I don't tell myself I'm a former alcoholic or I'm a former cocaine user. No, I don't. Or I'm still struggling with that. I don't anymore. There was probably some time in the first year or so where maybe I would have probably done some more, but I would never say I'm a recovering cocaine user. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Am I on the right track? Am I off track here?
I would say it's individualized. And so for some people, having that identity helps them stay sober, or it's a part of what they're doing. But for others, it is a negative. And for me, what happened was the first 6 months when I was taught to identify myself, let's say in a meeting, I'm Mary Beth and I'm an addict, right? Like that. I was taught that's how you do it because that's your title. For the first 6 months, I kind of thought it was helpful. Like I needed to beat it in my brain, you know? Yeah. But then I started feeling uncomfortable. I felt like I was saying it as if it's the essence of who I am.
Right. So yourself, you can identify it as that, right?
Right. That is like the core of me and will always be the core of me. And I wasn't comfortable with it anymore. And then I found Women for Sobriety. And in WFS, the identifier is I'm Mary Beth and I'm a competent woman.
Oh, I love that.
That was so much more empowering for me. And that felt so, so much stronger. The other thing is when I think about, am I an addict forever? I'll say, so there is a group of people who at one point had an addiction who later can moderate, or there are some people who can't moderate alcohol, but they can cannabis or vice versa. Mm-hmm. But there's also a large group of us who can never moderate anything ever. And I think that's me. I feel like I fall into that category because my addiction was very lengthy. I didn't get sober till 32 and I was an addict by 16. And I was, it was meth and it was very severe for a long time. I don't believe I can safely consume mood altering substances, except the occasional very short-term medication for some, very specific reason. So do I consider myself an addict forever? I, in the sense that I don't think I can safely use, I am, but in the sense that I'm not using and there are no negative consequences in my life. And I honestly can't imagine a scenario under which I would pick up again. I mean, never say never.
Right.
If it were to happen, I think almost certainly it would happen because I had to use pain meds for some period of time for some reason. That's the only in I could see. But most people, even with a long-term addiction, they can, they can moderate after that if they're focused on containing it. And the other thing I'll say is that this relates also to me to the idea that in some programs, there's this idea that you have to hyper focus on your recovery from substances every day for the rest of your life. That's not true for most of us. And I
agree.
Me, I think that's a positive to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, this hard work, right? I don't know why that's considered to be helpful to tell somebody that.
Constant obsession. Imagine if you were a victim in another way and you just, obsess about that trauma all day long, continuously obsess about that. I can't imagine that's helpful.
Well, that's true, but it's also this message that you're never going to really be in control when the truth is you really will get into control. The reality is that addiction gets easier. Recovery gets easier over time. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that it's pure rewiring. Like we talk a lot about how addiction rewires the brain, but recovery rewires the brain. Right?
Yeah.
A positive habit formation. You're making the same positive choices over and over. You now have practiced saying no to drugs and alcohol out when you're out in the world. You've now learned how to deal with your emotions and your trauma and your mental health in a healthier way, right? So over time, it gets easier. And that's why if you hit 5 years of continuous sobriety, you only have a 15% chance of ever relapsing at that point.
Wow.
And so to me, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The hard work is usually the first 18 to 36 months, depending on where you are. Now, there are some people who struggle more on a longer term basis, but it's by far the minority. And so that idea of am I an addict forever ties to me with am I fighting this every day for the rest of my life? For most of us, the answer to that is no. As long as we do the hard work in the beginning to build a strong foundation and address what's underneath the drug use.
So you've alluded to this a few times where how long you've done meth, about 15 years or so. What happened at 32 to just be like, listen, my career is over with this. I'm done. Like what happened then?
See, I think that's sort of like the paradigm, right? There's like some epiphany and now I'm over. And I don't think that's what happens for most of us. And that's not what happened for me. But what happened for me was at 32, I couldn't hold a job. I had a Berkeley degree and good grades and had wasted my education and worked my way, as I say, down the corporate ladder. Okay. But also I was having physical problems. I was emotionally devastated. I was feeling trapped. I was feeling hopeless. My partner was ready to throw me out. So sort of everything in combination that made me finally say, well, maybe I should go to rehab. But I did not go to rehab thinking, I actually didn't think I could get sober. I didn't really think it was an option. I was trying to figure out how to use less, how to do better. And it was exposure to other people who had similar histories, but who were succeeding at sobriety that made me start to realize that maybe I could do it too. And the other thing is I wasn't perfectly abstinent from day one. Most people aren't. I used 3 times in my first 5 months. But I don't view that as fail, succeed, right? I mean, for gosh sake, I was using meth every day for, the last 10 years and a chunk of the 5 years before that. And now I use 3 times in 5 months. Why? That's a success.
That's
right?
a deal. Yeah.
That's the best improvement.
Yeah.
And so I like to throw those ideas. Most of us are either ambivalent in the beginning or we lack confidence that we can do it. And that's normal. And increasing confidence, increasing commitment to the sobriety goal usually is something that happens over time.
Was that your first time ever going to rehab?
It was my first time in rehab. It certainly wasn't the first time I tried to control my drug use. I mean, like many of us, I had gone through a lot of different efforts of only on the weekend or only from these days to that, or then I take a week break. I mean, I had tried all kinds of, different moderation strategies, none of which I ever succeeded at for more than a short period of time. But it was my one and only time going to rehab, yes. Although I did go in a longer term program. It was a 90 days minimum. So it wasn't a 30-day program.
Yeah, it's funny the stories we tell ourselves when we're trying to, I like nicotine. So, I'm like, I'm only going to smoke a cigar on the weekend. Well, it's like, well, I'm only going to have one after work. I was like, well, I'll have a little in the morning. And it's like the story I tell myself. I always say, if I were to tell this to somebody, they'd be like, That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. But we convince ourselves of these things. And we think it's a genius plan, and it's not.
Well, and if it works, great. It's like when newcomers tell me they still think they can moderate, I say two things. And one is, haven't you already tried that? You know?
Yeah.
And the other is, if you're going to try it, you need to be honest with yourself. You need to say a specific plan and then be honest if you're able to do it. Because if you're not able to do it, that's important information, right? And so... But yeah. I mean, most of us try to moderate long before we get to rehab.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this moderation thing. I think I want to do an episode later on about it, but I feel like there's two types of people. And I think we've alluded to this a bit here. People that can moderate and people that can't. And I think this is something I've had to do, which is what I've done myself. I'm not prescribing anything to anybody, but I've had to say to myself, like, which camp do I fall into? And it's hard. You got to be honest with yourself and say, I can do it. No, like to me, I'm just all out. I want to do all of it. I want to get all of the ice cream, whatever it is, that's my thing. I want all of it or nothing. And I've had to take an honest look at myself and say, that's what it is. I can either have a box full of cigars in my office or I can have none. So if I have any, I can't control myself. And so that's how I've figured out that works. If I go to a party, whatever, I can't have a drink. I will drink until I need an Uber home. So that's something I've had to be honest with myself and figure out. And I talk to the people. I'm trying to talk to people and see what the things. And I know people that are like, oh, I've got a thing of candy in here. I love candy. It's been in there for 6 months. I have one piece and I walk away and I'm like, I would destroy that.
It's true. I mean, there are some things I don't allow in the house. There's these chocolate covered dried mango things that they sell.
Oh,
I cannot have them in the house because I love them, and I'll do one and then one. But I have regular chocolates and I'm able to do like one a day. And so it just depends on where we are. But with everything, it's important to admit to ourselves what's going on. Right. And if you're not honest with yourself, you can't make forward progress. If you can't see the problem, you can't work on the problem, right? And seeing it and acknowledging it is really the first step in being able to get it under better control. But there are some people who, especially at the more mild level of the substance use disorder, there are some people who would have qualified under the test at one point, and then later they can moderate, but it's not the majority of us. And it definitely, the more severe your addiction, the less likely that's ever going to be you, And so I know that's not me. Sometimes people say like, well, you have 31 years, can't you have a beer?
Yeah.
But look, the world wouldn't explode if I had a beer, but this is what I really believe would happen. I think the negotiation would start.
Right.
How often could I have a beer and it's not a problem, right? Well, if I can have a beer once in a while, I could smoke weed once in a while. What if I just did meth on my birthday? Like,
right.
Where it's going to go. And one of the joys of long-term sobriety is that the lack of that obsession, that you're not thinking about it, that you don't have to have those negotiations with yourself. I'm not opening that door again. There's no good that can come of that. And there's a lot of bad that could come from that.
Yeah, definitely. I see what you're saying there because I haven't drank in over 10 years. And, my son was born and stuff. For me, it was one of those kind of moments where like, I cannot be out partying. At the time, I was, I ran a company and things, and then I'd come home and then go out until God knows what time in the morning and then go to work. And when he was born, I was like, I can't also have a child. And so I was like, I need to stop. I drink too much. Like I'm out too late and whatnot. So I had to stop that. And I hadn't done it in a long time. And I just made a decision, like, listen, I just don't drink anymore. That's it. And I just stopped. And that's something that I was fortunate with. But maybe 2 years ago, and I tell everybody, like, I don't drink and I don't have a problem. It took me a while to go to a party or barbecue and be like, hey, you want a beer? And I'm like, I would like one, but I know I can't have one. So it took me a while to just be okay with that. And now I don't care. But it was a couple of New Year's ago. And somebody said, oh, just have a little champagne. I was like, fuck, whatever. I'll just give me I just want a small little thing. That's it. And I drank that. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this at all.
Did it bring up the urge?
Oh yeah. I was ready to grab the whole champagne bottle and Uber home. And I was like, wow, okay, I can't do this. This is not my thing. And it was just strange. It's just maybe 2 sips of champagne. And I couldn't do it. I was like, wow. And it's not, at home with my wife, like we did one time, we celebrated. I didn't care, but because I was at a party, I was like, it's on.
See,
and I was like, I gotta go home.
You know, that's interesting. Is one time I was at the dentist and I was having a major work done, and they gave me nitrous, and I was so high, I was like uncomfortable. Like I was like, oh my God, like I don't want to feel this again. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a positive high for me. It was I didn't like just say, oh, it's like a free high. Let me enjoy it.
Yeah.
I felt anxious. Like this is a risk for me. I don't want this feeling anymore, you know? And so it's sort of with you, it raised that red flag that this is not a pause. This is a risk for me. I need to change it. I need to stop.
Yeah. And I think to me, it must have been the party that was really like, let's go. But like you said, it's easy to have been like, well, you know, and you start to have this negotiation, right? That's tough. So you wind up getting yourself together. You went to Berkeley Law. You became a judge. What was the obstacles, to becoming a lawyer, maybe even or a judge after your kind of addiction? Was that something that came up a lot? How did you deal with that? How did that all kind of work out?
Well, I'll first mention that it's not like when I got sober, I thought one day I'll be a judge. Right.
When
I got sober, again, I had this embarrassing resume, but I had, but my Berkeley degree. But my first professional goal when I got home from rehab was let's not get fired again. Like that was really where I was at, and I didn't like it. Like I wanted, I'm 32. There's an urge in early recovery to make up for lost time. Like I need to make up for lost time, right? But I was sensible enough. And also there was, two things. One is nobody was going to hire me for a career job at that point in my life because my work history was so bad. But also I wasn't ready. And so I had to admit that to myself. I didn't like it, but I had to admit it. And so I started at 32, home from rehab, at a low-level, part-time temporary job. I had to get practice to get up and go to work every day on time and stay all the hours I was supposed to be there and do a good job and go back and do it again the next day and the next. That was new for me. I had to get it sort of the habit developed, right? And then my second job was a permanent mid-level full-time job. And then I got a supervisory job at a large company and got a promotion. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law. So I was 39 years old and 6.5 years sober because that's when I was ready. And then I was a lawyer at a big firm. And then I worked for the government for class actions. And at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal judge. So that's how that played out. And I say that in part for the friends and families who are listening or for those in early recovery. I did not think when I got sober at 32, I would become a judge. Sobriety it's long. If you do it well and you do it right, there's a lot of future opportunity, but it's a step-by-step thing. What am I ready for now? What do I want my next step to be? What skills do I need to get so I can get that right next job? It's a process. But on the addiction side, I never had to disclose my addiction when I became a lawyer because they don't ask you, like the California bar does not say, have you ever used a drug? If they said that, almost everybody would say yes, right? So they don't ask that. Yeah. What they asked me was, in the last 5 years, have you used an illegal substance or have you had a problem with it? It was something like that.
Right.
But at the time that they asked about 5 years, I had 9 years sober, right? So way more than they were asking about. And then when I went to work for the federal government, I think they asked about 7 and I had 14. And then when I was a judge, they asked about 10 and I had 20. And so I could always tell the truth and tell them nothing at the same time. But when I was a judge, I did join the board for LifeRank Secular Recovery. And I did tell them about it at that point because it's considered what's called an outside activity. And I had to run it through ethics. And so I didn't give them any details about my drug history. I just said, I don't know. I said, I'm 23 years sober. I'm going to join this board. Here's what I'm going to do. And, please approve, and so that's how it played out. But all other people have different experiences, depending on sort of how long they've been sober and if they have felony convictions. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. But for me, I was I actually read an opinion piece for the Los Angeles Times. That's on my website, junketedjudge.com. about how if I would have been a person of color, the odds of me being a lawyer or a judge would have been a lot lower because I probably would have had a much longer criminal record. And so I talked about that in the opinion piece. Yeah. But that for me, it worked out because of the timing.
Were you relieved or something? You didn't have to disclose this or were you okay disclosing it?
I wouldn't have lied, but I was
Right.
relieved because you don't know how people are going to react. I mean,
Right, that's what I was
the thing
wondering.
is that once you tell somebody, let's say at work, you lose control of the narrative, right? And so people, and most people will be fine, especially the more sobriety you have, the less likely people will be concerned. But there's still that group that will, view it as a moral issue or as, you were committing crimes every day that you had meth on your possession. Well, yeah, I was, because I was a meth addict. Like that's
Right.
what it's right. So it's that you don't know what the reaction is going to be of someone who may have authority over you or be making decisions about your career. And that's why now that I'm retired, I retired as a judge 5 years ago, always emphasize early retirement. But it allowed me to be open for the first time where I can talk about my whole story and not have to worry about professional ramifications. And I do feel like I'm standing in the place of people who can't do that or choosing not to do that because they don't want the consequences they might have to face, which would often be unfair consequences. And so this is my chance to talk openly in a new way. And it's been a really rewarding time for me.
Do you fear maybe they would find a reason to reopen some of your cases and scrutinize things?
No, because I was sober before I was a lawyer, right? And so, so that did make it easier. I mean, that made it easier. There was no overlap between my drug use and my legal career. So yes, that made it easier for me.
Okay, that's interesting. What was your self-talk like when you were, thinking about law school, thinking about these things and trying, you're getting yourself together, you're doing these things, you're going, what was your self-talk like from that 32-ish when you started getting a job and getting a little bit of discipline? How did that go?
Well, I will say that for me, so when I got home from rehab, I knew the trauma was underneath my drug use. And so I looked for a therapist with trauma expertise. And she, to my surprise, but correctly diagnosed me with PTSD, which for me showed up as very severe anxiety. So my early recovery, my sobriety recovery was easier and faster than my other mental health condition recovery. And I spent a lot of those years in a state of heightened anxiety. And a lot of it was about, in my house, what I did and what happened to me were not correlated, right? And so I was always had this deep conviction that if I made one little mistake, or even not a mistake, just something was misinterpreted or whatever, I was going to lose everything I had gained. It was all going to blow up in my face. So I was always spinning and thinking about the worst case scenario and ruminating over things I had done or that I thought were wrong. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow" girl, because no matter how things were going today, I couldn't really fully enjoy it or fully feel a sense of deserved accomplishment because my trauma, my PTSD created such anxiety about what might happen any second now. And so it was a struggle. I had to do a lot of work on the PTSD and trauma side. I did individual therapy with an expert for 3 years. I was on anti-anxiety meds for a while. And then I was in a group therapy with women with trauma histories for several more years after individual therapy. And even then I would have said I was 80% recovered. And today I say 90 to 95, depending on the day. But it's hard work. But I don't want to scare anybody because it's not a light switch, right? It's incrementally better. This month's better than last month and this year is better than last year. But that was the harder work. And I think that is fairly common, especially for people with significant abuse histories like I had.
It kind of reminds me of like that adage or whatever it is, like, well, I should have started this 5 years ago. And then your future self was just like, you should have started. You're going to think I should have started today.
That's right.
Like, it's like, just start now and just get it going. And then you're going to look back one day and be like, wow, I've come a long way, but you got to start now. You got to plant that tree today so you can live in the shade in the future.
That's right. And for me, I actually had to force myself as a technique to look back and see my progress because all I could see, my natural inclination was to see my imperfections, what I could have, should have, would have had if I wouldn't have been using drugs all those years, any little mistake I might make. And so I had to force myself intermittently to stop and say, oh, Ashley, in 6 months or a year or 2 years, you actually look what you have made progress. Look where you are now compared to then. And I needed to make myself do it because otherwise I wouldn't see it. And it did help me start to feel more competent and more confident, that not only was I moving forward, but there was sort of no sign I had sort of peaked. You know what I mean? I was still on the uphill slide, but that was not my natural inclination. That was something I had to learn to do.
Did that, I don't want to say skill, but did that maybe translate to a skill as being a lawyer?
I think it's an important skill for managing life in general, to be able to see the progress. But certainly as a lawyer, when you get, being an attorney is hard. And you always, I do continuing legal ed training on substance use for attorneys, because attorneys have double the addiction rate of the general population for every drug.
Wow. And
there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is basically the expectation of perfection. Like lawyers aren't supposed to make mistakes. And that was already my weakness, right? Is that I was worried about mistakes. And so that sort of played into it. And I will say that I'm on the board for She Recovers, and we're not just for substance recovery, but also like trauma and mental health and other behavioral disorders like eating or gambling. But for us, we know that people can be in recovery from perfectionism and overwork, and perfectionism and overwork are often trauma responses. And that's really what it was for me, is that, if I didn't do everything perfectly all the time and do all the work necessary to get to that point, which of course I never quite got to, then I was going to lose it all, because that's what had happened to me in the past, that I couldn't control outcomes, right? And so there was a lot of play going on, and it definitely plays out in the legal profession.
Is there any other, I know you do a lot of training with you saying attorneys, judges, medical professionals, and around addiction stuff. Is there any other misconceptions or things that you've encountered that maybe surprise us?
I have some trainings where, like, I talk about the interplay of trauma and substance use, and the interplay of mental health and substance use. Like for example, a lot of people have heard the adverse childhood experiences score, that list of 10 questions about adverse childhood experiences. If you have an ACE score of 4, your odds of developing an addiction are like 3 or 4 times higher than the general population. And my ACE score is 7. And so I had a much higher odds. It also plays into thing. I just had a piece published, and it's on my website, about the interplay of promiscuity and sexual assault and drug addiction. And if you have a high, like a 7A score, like I do, a lot of sexual assaults, your odds of becoming promiscuous are literally like 46 times as likely to have 50 or more partners. There are a lot of lifetime ramifications from trauma that sometimes we judge the individual when really we should be asking, well, where does this come from? What happened? And especially when things happen in your youth, right? Your brain's not fully developed and it's being impacted. Your behaviors, you don't always understand. And so that's part of why the prevention side is really important with the teenagers, right? And sometimes I get asked, like, what's the number one thing we could do to reduce the addiction rate? And America has one of the highest addiction rates in the world for many reasons. But to me, the answer to that always is mental health treatment for kids. Because if we intervene early and address their trauma or their bipolar or their, depression, their odds of ever developing an addiction are going to be a lot lower. And so I talk about that sometimes with people.
Yeah, I think we need to embrace doing hard things. We need challenges. We need things. My opinion about America being so high on that is it's very soft here. It's very easy here. We don't have to worry about a lot. As far as the world goes, it's easy to get food. Yes, there's people that don't fall into those situations, but I think things are easy here, and I think to me that's part of the problem.
That's interesting, because I think things are hard here, and that's part of the problem. We don't have supports, right? We don't have medical treatment for everybody. We don't have mental health treatment for everybody. We don't have a robust system to deal with homelessness. We don't have, a robust system for treatment. It's really hard for parents to get good mental health treatment for kids. It can be a real struggle to find good treatment.
Interesting.
So to me, I think actually we are, in a lot of other countries, they have a much more wraparound services for physical and mental health than we do. There's more of a safety net than we have. I think people feel on their own here. So I think that's part of it, but also we don't do early intervention, and early intervention is really a key. It's going to reduce the odds a lot. The other thing I'll say that surprises some people, because I get a lot of questions from friends and family, what can they do? And that tough love idea, that do what I say now, go to the treatment program I picked for you and do it today because I decided, or I'm going to cut you off if you don't do it. That whole tough love ideology is actually very ineffective. It works for some people. Everything works for somebody, right? I mean, incarceration works for somebody. It's not effective overall, and it's ridiculously expensive, and we could be better off spending the money on treatment, but it works for some people. But for friends and family, that tough love ideology is very ineffective. And the better approach is called, well, you probably know, called CRAFT, right? Community reinforcement and family training. And that's a much more positive reinforcement approach. And it's also a recognition that the drugs are serving a purpose in the life of the person who's struggling. And so it's important to look at what purpose are they serving? How can we get that need met in another way? And how can we get you the help we need? But also for friends and family, what do they need to do to take care of their own emotional health? Because it's very stressful to have somebody, in trouble. And what's a sort of a help that might be useful? And what's a help that's going to have a negative impact? So tough love, even knowing that tough love is not the right approach, is very surprising to people. And so I always direct friends and family to a really excellent book, in my opinion, which is Beyond Addiction. And that's based on CRAFT approaches. And so that's another thing people are surprised about. They think those intervention shows on TV are actually best practices, and they're not.
Yeah, I was very surprised to learn that, because that's my default. Like, let's go, let's get it done. Like, come on. Like, stop being a wuss. Let's go. That's probably from how I grew up, I guess. And that, like you're saying, it probably works for me. So I figure it must work for everybody.
Well, and friends and family can have a role. Like, the individual may be so sort of, overwhelmed and in their addiction that they can't do the research. So it could be helpful, maybe, if they want, for the friends and family to say to you, hey, look, I did some research and here's 3 treatment options. Do any of these interest you? Like, it's not that the family can't be useful. It's the demanding, mandatory, do what I say when I say it that runs into trouble. I mean, think about mental health generally. The data shows that if people are involved in developing their mental health treatment plan, they do better overall. And it's going to be true for addiction too. But yeah, look, and the other thing I will mention is I'm friends and family too. Okay. Everybody I know with an addiction, we also are friends and family. We have loved ones, friends and relatives usually, who struggle. And I know the frustration and the fear, and I know how hard it can be. But we want to approach the person struggling with a way that's going to be more likely to be effective, and not in a way that's getting our untreated emotional needs met, which is also why it's important to get the help and support that you need if you're the family or the friend.
Is there any other non-conventional, maybe not stereotypical, either, recovery paths that have impressed you, or maybe you even changed your mind about?
Well, I will say that a lot of people find things like meditation and yoga useful, and I have never been a good meditator or a yoga person. I tend to do meditation when I'm like at a high stress point, when really like a regular practice is beneficial. And there are some recovery programs that really incorporate that. Women, as She Recovers, we have yoga meetings, and we have dance actually for the mind body. Recovery Dharma, which is Buddhist based, a lot of that's based on mindfulness. So there are definitely strategies that, like, when I was in rehab and they made us meditate, I thought, what is this woo-woo stuff, But it turns out it actually is an effective tool for a lot of people, whether for substance use or anxiety or other conditions. I'm just not good at it.
I don't think anybody's good at it. I don't think that's the point, is not to be good at it. The point is just to observe and kind of do.
That's probably true, but I'm not good at the regular practice of it. It's hard for me to shut my mind off. So but a lot of people find it really beneficial.
If you guys are interested in that, I have a few apps I really like. I'm like you, I don't really care for it, but there's a couple of things that I've tried, and I was able to do it for a bit and then kind of learn it. And I found a lot of help from it. It like helps you kind of be in tune with your mind and like not understand, like, not everything you think you have to act on or is real or whatever it is. And that for me helped a lot, because I've got pages of ideas and notes and things so to kind of just say, like, I can let that one go. That was helpful for a bit.
Well, and I had to learn that in my therapy, right? I had a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. My therapist really had to teach me or help me learn that that just because I thought that the catastrophe was going to happen doesn't mean it was going to happen. And then at some point, I got to the point where I would say to her, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it could happen. And I need to be ready just in case. But it took me a long time to release that sort of ruminating. And part of it was eventually her helping me get to the point where what I understood was that bad things actually will happen, not at the rate that I think they're going to happen, not at the frequency that I think is going to happen, but they will happen. Probably half the time, things that never even occurred to me to worry about will happen.
Yeah.
But what I have to trust is that I will be able to handle it, not necessarily without pain, not without disruption, not without effort, but that I can find my way through it. And that's what ultimately that's what I had to learn to trust. And that was a insight to me that took me a long time to be able to fully appreciate. And it really was a key to me getting my anxiety under better control.
That's a great viewpoint. I mean, so many things we have no control over, but we can respond instead of react in a particular way.
Yes. And I mean, this is life. I mean, bad things happen to all of us, right? And you have to know that you have the tools and the abilities that you need. And part of that's about your friends and you're having a support network. And part of that's having tools in yourself to not let it escalate. Like now I say 90 to 95% recovered on the severe anxiety. But when I get triggered now, first of all, it's rare. And second, and then it's not as intense and it doesn't last as long. Like I can get out of the spin in a couple hours and maybe at most 2 days, whereas before it could go on for a month, And so part of it's learning how to pull yourself out of those kind of spirals.
That's amazing because I can imagine, I can't, I've never experienced it, but I can just imagine that paralyzing feeling, and maybe the things don't get done because you're so stuck in that rumination where you maybe there's no action and there's no movement, but being able to take that down, like you're saying, that's got to be powerful. Wow.
Yeah. Although I was always really productive, it's just, but I could look like I was handling everything well, but emotionally I was in a bad space, even though I was making the right next choice and doing the work and doing what I needed to do. I wasn't able to absorb my success, and I wasn't able to appreciate where I was and what was going right. So I was doing what I needed to do, usually making mostly good decisions, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel the accomplishment. I couldn't feel the success. I couldn't feel the good things that happened because all I could focus on was the negative. It was unfortunate because I was making so many good new choices in early recovery, so much good new behavior, and I wasn't able to feel as proud of myself as I really deserved to feel.
It's like celebrating your wins.
Yeah. And learning to trust myself that you got this, girl, those words I never would have said, it's like, well, you're on the edge of a little cliff at all times. And, who knows when you're going to get toppled over, and so, it was a tough way to live. But a lot of that, again, is that I had mental health disorders that weren't treated when I was younger. And that was sort of underneath the whole thing. And so I was starting from sort of scratch to address my childhood. Even my own understanding of my childhood history was incomplete when I got sober. Like I knew about like the big events that the 6-hour rape and, like those things, but I really didn't appreciate the nuance of coming home every day and not knowing what was going to happen, or literally walking on eggshells and all the things that I did because of the strain, or the emotional neglect. Really, I understood the screaming was bad or the hitting, but not the knowing that there was no parent on my side or looking out for me, that they were actually dangerous to me and not positive. So I only understood the negative impact of the like top level violence events. It took me a long time to understand the other factors that were going into making my anxiety as bad as it was. And so it took a while to even see it. And then, as I said, you can't work on it until you can see it,
Yeah. Wow, that's tough. I can't imagine that not having an adult or older person kind of on your side and helping you and making you feel safe and whatnot. That's gotta be tough. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. It's like when we moved in with my stepfather, he was much more violent than my mother. But the other thing was I already knew my mother wasn't there for me. Like so I knew I was on my own, and now I'm dealing with a crazy person and I'm 9, so yeah. Wow. It was a negative interplay.
Can you share maybe some of your favorite recovery organizations, support groups, community resources, things I can link to and help people? What, you have a list or something like that, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery, and I know the word secular is in there, but actually a lot of our members have personal, religious, or spiritual beliefs. It's just not part of our program, but we are very much focused on the individual recovery plan, and so we want to help you, and we have a book and other tools, and a group will help you build a plan that's right for you. About and help you move forward in that way. So it's a more self-empowered technique. One of our mantras is that you are not powerless, but in fact, you need to fight for your recovery. It's like a core way of thinking about it. And then I'm on the board for She Recovers. And as I mentioned, that's not just substance recovery. That's other behavioral disorders like gambling or gaming or eating, and grief and trauma and mental health. And it's all together because most of the women with an addiction have one or more of those other things to work on. And developing the problems, there's an interplay in the development, but there's an interplay in the recovery too. And so when She Recovers, you're not siloed off where you're only allowed to talk about your alcohol, or you're only allowed to talk about your eating. With us, it's everything together. Like somebody on a She Recovers, the private Facebook group, they might say something like, I'm doing really well with my alcohol, but my food's getting more out of control, or I'm spending more hours video gaming. So you can talk about how all that interplays. And so that's a good organization that I would recommend. So those are definitely two.
Perfect. And then, so we have your website, Junkie to Judge, tons of great things there. We have your book as well. And I'll link to that for you guys. You're on socials, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'll link to those. Any other things you want to point people to?
Well, I will say that 30% of my memoir is about recovery, because I really wanted to show like a real world example and and what that looks like. And so I tried to make sure the book was useful. And the other thing I will say on my socials, I do not argue with people on social media, but when I really post, and I really keep my socials narrowly focused, I only post about substance use, trauma, mental health, and the recoveries therefrom. I post the new studies that come out because there is a lot more research that's been going on the last 15 years. I post articles and opinion pieces and my recovery thoughts. And so if anybody's interested in following those topics, please do follow me on social media. But you're not going to find me talking about extraneous other issues or anything. I really try to stay focused because my goal at this point, part of it is education, right? I mean, we've talked about a lot today about different sort of informative topics, right? Areas of information. And that's really a big goal. But also I do share some of my strategies and techniques that I think helped me, some ideas, words of encouragement for others, that kind of thing. So when I retired, I try to sort of pick my lane and do what I can to be of use in that lane. So it's all integrated. The book, the opinion pieces that are on my website, the trainings I do, the speaking engagements, it's all around the same area. I wanted to pick an area I thought where I might have something to value add and sort of stick there and not go out.
Yeah, you do have some great informational pieces on your social. I was looking through your LinkedIn and whatnot. What do you think? What are your thoughts on like the different psychedelics and whatnot? Like things like MAPS and stuff is working on. Do you have any thoughts on those kind of things for?
Yeah, I mean, I support all research into what might be useful or looks useful. I mean, so right now we have some preliminary data that maybe psychedelics are useful for PTSD, but maybe they might be useful for oppression. There's some signs that cannabis is useful for certain conditions. And so I support research in all of it. I always want us to just to stay apprised of the science, right? And to stay apprised of what the information is showing us. So again, it's about accurate risk assessments. Like for example, cannabis, there are some positives, but there's also an indication now that for teenagers with psychosis in the family, that it's a particularly high risk thing to use cannabis. So I want people to know the whole picture, not just part of the picture, but anything that could be of use for treatment. I support the research in that. And hopefully we'll go down all avenues. I mean, there's a lot more, we'll see what happens now that the budgets, are being cut for research, but up until now, there's been a lot more research going on. And I always, because no one thing works for everyone. Right. The more tools, the more options we have, the more people we're going to be able to help.
Yeah, I've seen some incredible research around PTSD and some of these different substances. Amazing outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that we're now going from the small studies to the large studies, right?
Mhm.
So that's always,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, if it helps people, then we want to use it, and then you want to know under what conditions does it help, and in what
Right.
dose does it help, and for what
Right.
period of time does it help, and all of those things. And even if it helps the majority, there could still be a minority that might have a negative reaction. And how do
Yeah.
we identify that group? I mean, there's a lot of
Right. Yeah.
information we need. Yeah.
There's a ton. Yeah, there's tons to go into it, but there's some promise there. I do like what's going on
Yes.
with that.
Yes.
And then here on the Social Community Show, we like to do a weekly challenge, something that listeners can implement. Maybe it's an idea we talked about or not. And I'd like you to issue this week's challenge.
Okay, so I would say, since most people do use substances of one kind or another, or if you don't, then perhaps you're using things like scrolling through your phone or other sort of behaviors, to maybe just sit down and do an analysis about what are the positives and negative impacts in your life of that behavior. You know, do your best to do an honest assessment, and then think about, am I therefore doing this behavior in at the rate or in the way that I want, or maybe make a new plan that's going to suit your preferred lifestyle better, fit your goals better, that kind of thing.
Oh, I love that. I think especially with cell phones, people spend a lot of time on those things. And if you don't think you're addicted, try and have somebody take your phone and walk away and see how crazy you get.
It's true. It's all dopamine bump, right? I mean, that's what's underneath a lot of this, you know? So yeah, exactly. It's more about the behaviors versus one specific behavior. If it's not one area, it may be another. So look at whatever area you're sort of spending the most time that might be having a negative impact, do an analysis there.
And then here, the final question I'd like to ask you is, what does becoming legendary mean to you? Or maybe what does living a legendary life look like?
Legendary. Well, that's a big word. I mean, I wouldn't even, dare to say that legendary, but I think, at some point for most of us, being of service to to other people is an important part of where we get to. And that can look a lot of different ways. I mean, your podcast is a way of being of service, right? People are of service in their work, or they're part of a community, a peer support community of one area or another. So part of it in legendary, I guess, would be a word I might struggle categorizing myself as, or for most of us, but I think it can be rewarding and part of a sort of a well-rounded life to think about, is there any area where I can offer help and support to others, and what might that look like? And that changes over time, right? What I'm doing today, I wouldn't be able to do 20 years ago. And so new life markers, new phases of life can mean that we might be able to do different things or enjoy doing different things. I don't just do this. I do this because I hope I can add value, but I actually also enjoy speaking. I enjoy writing. I enjoy engaging. So I thought about, what are my skills? What do I like doing? And how can I take those skills and those things I enjoy and turn them into something useful?
Well, Mary Beth, you are on a legendary pursuit. It doesn't have to be a grandiose thing. Legendary can be, like you're saying, just helping your community. Just worry about your block. That can be a legendary pursuit. I think you're doing legendary things. And I would like to continue on. We all know you're saving lives out there. You're definitely helping people.
Well, thank you. I try.
Perfect. Well, I've had a great time here. I've learned a lot. I got a lot of notes. I hope this can help people. And thank you so much for coming on, sharing all of your knowledge, being so vulnerable. I thank you so much for all of that.
Well, thank you. And I've loved our discussion. I really have. Thanks for having me.
What wonderful stories, insight, dialogue. I got a bunch of notes. I will get as many of these resources linked there for you guys as a reference here, as a spot you guys can come back to and get in here, find the things that you're looking for. If you've got a problem or you know somebody that does, this is going to be, I like to hope, a little bit of resource to lead you guys in an easy way to these places and different things. And as always here on the Social Community Show, there's no paywall, there's no premium content, there's no Social Community Plus to subscribe to. You get everything up front. And the only thing we ask for is, if you find any value in this episode, share it with at least 2 other people. If you'd like, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, or your favorite podcast player. For past episodes and links to everything we've discussed here today, head over to the socialchameleon.show. And until next time, keep learning, growing, and transforming on your path to becoming legendary.